Hey Ray, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
I would love to start off with just you giving an intro of who you are, what you do, and why you're so passionate about what we're talking about today.
Sure, I do a lot of things actually. My primary thing that I do is sex education. I run workshops on a variety of topics like STIs and stigma and pleasure and empowerment, and I'm developing a few on consent and contraception with my colleague. I'm also a latex designer. I have a latex fetish wear company where I do custom designs so that people can feel like they can truly express themselves in my creations. And I do a little bit of freelance and other kinds of, sex positive content creation. And I also am one of those girls who got an OnlyFans over the pandemic. So this is just like a big sex positive life that's being led over here.
I love that. And even when you mentioned the sexual expression in terms of the latex, that's one way to do it. But we've talked before, and there's so many different ways to express your sexuality. And a big one is just in general communication. So could you walk through when someone wants to talk about sex education, what are some of the main things you talk about when it comes to communication and sex?
Well, when it comes to communication and sex, there's this assumption that communicating about sex is either only sexy or not sexy at all. Either it's someone objectifying you with their language or you objectifying them, like how we see people talking to each other in porn, or it's a contract of boundaries. What can you do? What can't you do? And when it comes to communicating around sex, sometimes it's a blend, right? Like it's very important to clearly communicate your boundaries, hard and soft. Hard boundaries being something like, I will never want to pee on you. You can never pee on me. That's a good hard boundary that many people have. And then there's a soft boundary, which is, I'm not sure if I'm into being tied up, but if the moment was right and we were both feeling it, like maybe, so feel free to ask. So those are the different kinds of boundaries that you could communicate about. But the way you can communicate these boundaries is through flirting and dirty talk and, regular conversations like you would have when you flirt. So usually when it comes to communication, I do think that there's a really fun way that we can be having these conversations that are really resulting in trying to determine if you're sexually compatible with someone or if you'll feel safe in an interaction with someone. But the way you do that is through flirtation.
Yeah, and it can sometimes be hard, I know, for people to understand, is this a move or are they trying to make a move, trying to read that, and consent. I mean, you mentioned that's a huge thing, huge topic, especially in this day and age. So what's your advice for kind of exploring that and keeping it flirtatious, but also making it very clear what you're communicating?
I think as a cisgendered woman, we're frequently socialized to be pursued and not to pursue and not to be confident in what we want and what we need. And there's a lot of literature out there that says that women hit their sexual peak in their 30s and 40s, but that's specifically because women in their 30s and 40s typically have stopped giving a fuck about what they're supposed to be doing and they found their confidence. So for me, step one is finding out what you like, exploring what you yourself actually want and what you actually like. Because if you can't yourself determine what you want, you can't effectively communicate that to another person. So that's number one. And I think the second part of that socialization is women are frequently socialized to never say no. And there's many reasons for this, right? Like women are taught if they say no, they could be in danger. Or just that, it's uncomfortable. You don't want to deny a man anything. We owe men our time, our energy, our emotional labor all the time. So it's that first knowing what it is. And then as a woman, there's the way where you basically lay it out on the table and you let them pick it up, as a flirtation technique. An example that I could give would be you send a guy a text like, do you think I'm pretty in this dress? That's obviously a flirtation, but the guy might be oblivious and not know it. The second half of that is you might have to be the one to hit on the guy and say, hey, do you want to grab a drink? I think you're cute. And then the other aspect of that is if you are just being yourself. Let's say you're a naturally flirtatious person. You're just friendly. You're chatty. Guys take that as all of the nonverbal cues of flirting and they're wrong. You need to get very good at politely and firmly saying, oh, that is not what I meant. And if that person continues to push, then you disengage and no longer talk to that person. And having those own firm boundaries. Boundaries are not just for the bedroom. They're for everything leading up to it as well. Who do you want to choose to talk to? How often do you want to talk to them? What is the nature of the kinds of conversations you want to be having with them? All of that's very key.
Yeah, and That sounds like it goes into just understanding yourself, not only what you want, but in how you communicate as well. Because, I mean, the stereotype is guys that they're kind of oblivious and don't always pick up on what we're trying to do or trying not to do. But I have plenty of friends who are females, don't pick up on those cues too, where some people are just, they just need things very point blank explained to them. It's not always, yeah, it's not always they're going to pick up on what you are trying to put out there.
It's that constant struggle of, is this person just being friendly or are they actually interested in me? Yeah. And studies have actually shown that that nobody can tell when someone's flirting with them, by the way. Like,
really?
Nobody. Yeah. Part of it has to do with each person has their own flirt style. And I once had someone ask me, can you describe the flirt styles? And I was like, this isn't a BuzzFeed quiz. This is real life. And it's just like how everyone communicates unique to themselves. Everyone flirts uniquely to themselves. And because everyone has their own unique flirt style, they can't tell when someone else is flirting. That's where you get the person who goes, they're being mean to me. They hate me, and that person was like, no, I thought we had like a banter going, right? Yeah. Like there's a lot of miscommunication happening because nobody flirts in the same way. Nobody knows when they're being hit on, apparently. So that's just a fun thing to keep in mind. If you are unsure, if they know that you're flirting, it's probably because they're unsure.
That's a really good point. And just a good thing to point out so people realize that because you know you're flirting and that's your style, that does not mean that they're picking up on it. Or there's times where my boyfriend and I will just be joking back and forth and he'll just keep it going, and it started off as cute banter and then it starts to irritate me and he doesn't pick up on that. And so it's just, we're different people, we communicate differently. So keeping that in mind, that's a huge point to bring up just by itself.
Yeah, I think there's also this added new struggle. Well, okay, I should add that I spent 8 years working at a swingers and lifestyle sex club. So this is a place where consenting adults would go to have sex with each other on the premises or not, or just hang out and meet other like-minded couples. And there were very strict no touching policies. You don't touch people without asking first. And thanks to consent culture becoming bigger, we are now learning that we just don't casually touch people in settings. That being said, if you go to an average bar or an average interaction, there is a lot of casual touching. You know, that guy who feels the need to trail his hand across your lower back when he goes to grab the drink, and you're like, I don't know you. Or the guy who sees that you're talking to your friends and taps you on the shoulder until you turn around to talk to him. So there's a lot of this casual touching, and the problem is that when someone is sexually interested, they will find excuses to casually touch you. Mm-hmm. So how do you flirt with someone when that's no longer an option? If all of these nonverbal cues that are already hard to read, you're taking away another nonverbal cue and all you have is the words and maybe some eye contact, that can be a challenge that I want to acknowledge. What I will say is that when it comes to cisgendered women, it's more about empowering women to feel like they can be the pursuer or be very clear in their intentions, right? Everyone's afraid of rejection. Everyone. But that doesn't mean you don't try.
Right. And I don't know if this is a really good question because, as you mentioned, everyone's communication styles are so different. But when someone comes to you and asks for advice on, you know, what to say, how to communicate to somebody, maybe it's not specific phrases that you can give, but what does that generally look like in helping someone find words to communicate these things?
So it depends on the person and the context. When I would do like flirtation lessons, when I did work at the sex club, I kept it very basic and bare minimum, partially because a lot of the people who struggle with flirting sometimes struggle with basic conversation skills. So my first running lesson, my joke, it's not really a joke, but my first lesson would always be a conversation is a give and take. So you ask a question and then you wait for the answer and then you share a personal story to show connection, you know, and then you ask another. Or if you are asked a question, you need to answer the question and then respond with a question for the person. Mm-hmm. Because, you know, if it's just you being asked questions, it's an interview. If it's just you volunteering information, you're a self-absorbed asshole. Yeah. So first of all, I will give people who are very beginners at this the formula of answer the question, ask a question. Answer the question, ask a question. And do your best to, you know, be a little bit witty. If you can, if that's possible, or at least if you're getting to know someone. And if you're having a good time, it doesn't matter what you're talking about, it's going to be flirtatious. Yeah. If you are sexually attracted to someone and they're sexually attracted to you, you could have a conversation about your favorite kind of cheese and it will be flirtatious because you are attracted to each other and because you're having a good time. Yeah. But if you're not attracted to each other, it's kind of one way. That's a sign that maybe it's not really working out. That's number one. Another flirtation tactic that I give is no your niche, right? I am a 5'2" white woman. I can go up to literally anyone and say, hey, I find you sexually attractive. You want to go home with me? And that will be received well because I am a non-threatening, tiny, confident woman. And if a guy isn't into that confidence, fine, no loss there. It's not going to be a good lay anyway. Or like it would be a bad relationship just based off the fact that they're not receptive to my flirt style. If I were a 6 foot tall, broad-shouldered man in a dark alleyway, that flirt tactic would probably not be effective and may result in someone calling the police. So figure out how you present, how you come off to people, and find a way that will get you the result that you're looking for, with the understanding that if it doesn't work, it's probably because you're incompatible, and that's okay. You are not trying to attract everyone. You're trying to attract the people that you vibe with. So if you get rejected, take that as a sign that it would have been a waste of your time anyway, and that's totally fine and totally fair. The last sort of like piece of advice I would give is, let's say you're trying to flirt, but it's getting closer to like you're going to the bedroom. This is when your dirty talk comes in. I want to do this to you. I can't wait for you to do that to me. I'd love to try this or that. And it could be as robotic as, I want you to eat me out. Or it could be as flirtatious as, I can't wait to feel your tongue all over my body. And that's a great way of implying, this is what I'm asking from you.
Yeah.
And then if they start, literally licking all over your body and that's not what you meant, that's when you politely go, ooh, your tongue is so strong. I'd love to feel it on my clitoris, right? Like you just get really specific and it sounds sexy, but you're giving better direction. Does that answer your question? That was a little long-winded.
No, I love it. I mean, it's supposed to be, right? Like you're the expert here and we want to hear your thoughts on all of this. So no, that was perfect. That made total sense. And I love that you pointed out the reframe of the fear of being objected, because that is such a true thing. And honestly, I mean, I'm going to relate it to sales. I'm not a sex educator, so that's what I can relate it to. But we were taught that, when you're on the phone or you're talking to someone and they say no, a lot of times that can mean that it's probably not a good fit. You don't want to force a sale on someone. You don't want to be calling them every single day trying to get them to meet with you. You want it to be a good interaction where you're both mutually benefiting. And there is an age-old, in sales, we relate it to relationships all the time. Of you're literally dating when you go on a sales call or a sales meeting or a pitch, like you're seeing if it's a good fit for each other. There are so many times when that's related, and it's true. And if people object or say no or have a good reason to say no or kind of blow you off, it's a decision of, is it worth your time to keep pursuing it or not? So a very unsexy analogy, but that's the kind of analogy I can give.
Well, it's perfect because there's nothing more frustrating than someone who ignores you when you've said no. And you're asking yourself, was I unclear? And you read your transcript, you're like, I was not unclear. And let's say you did want to make a sale. Let's say you're trying to sell a personal training service and someone says, I'm actually really happy with my trainer right now. No, thank you. If you push, they're never going to call you. If something happens with that relationship with that trainer and you were pushy and annoying, they're not going to call you. Same thing with when it comes to relationships with people. If someone says, no, I'm sorry, I'm not interested right now. I have a boyfriend. I'm busy. I'm washing my cat. And they literally mean their cat, or they're masturbating because they'd rather do that than fuck you. Like whatever it means, if you accept that no gracefully, even as a woman, you accept a no gracefully, you are more likely to be able to build a relationship later. And I'm not saying that we should, take no as a maybe one day they'll change their minds. But if you say no they say no and you handle it well, that is proof that you are a well-adjusted human being who is worth their time to continue communicating with.
Exactly. It's being respectful of the no, showing that you're a person who can respect other people. And if it one day turns into something awesome, if not, you're being a good human being.
Yeah. And we don't have to be friends with everyone. I feel like there's this assumption that, I'm sexually attracted to this person, so I should be fine with friendship if they say no. Or why doesn't the guy want to be friends with me when I said no? And if they are looking for, I'm sorry, this is very cisgendered and heteronormative of me. I apologize. I do speak a lot to heterosexual women. But in general, we don't need to be friends with people we don't want to be friends with. Our time is limited. Our time is precious. And if you don't actually want to be friends with this person because you're looking for something more and you won't be satisfied with friendship, make things easier and just remove yourself and say, that's just not what I'm looking for right now. And I think you're really great, but I don't want to make this the kind of relationship where I'm always hoping for something more. Have a great life. Let's devote our time to people who will actually give us the kind of care that we're looking for.
And that's so relatable to something you were saying earlier about women are just we're so enabled to want to say yes. We don't think we can say no. We feel bad. We want to take care of other people. I mean, we literally feel bad asking for things that we want and feeling like we have to do something in return. That's, I mean, it's a stereotype, but it's so true for so many of us women.
Yeah. And it's exhausting. It's an exhausting way to live, to be giving of yourself all the time.
Exactly.
I find it very interesting that women struggle to ask for what they want because they're embarrassed about maybe their body parts or where they get their pleasure from, and men are never embarrassed. I have never met a guy who's embarrassed to say, I want you to squeeze my balls as hard as you can, or I just want you to eat my ass. But there are women who are so afraid to say, do you mind touching my clitoris, the organ that actually gives me an orgasm? You know, like, why is it that we are so embarrassed to demand the pleasure that we deserve when guys will literally ask for the weirdest shit without even a question?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. There's even movies that make jokes of that, or you can watch and see that gender dynamic of, yeah, they'll ask for literally anything, but then we as women just for some reason create the story in our head that we feel bad or they're going to like us less. I don't know if it's related to wanting to be desired or wanting to be liked. I mean, everyone probably has their own reasons for why, or just like being a people pleaser. That's very common in women. Whatever it is, it's going back to understanding your sexual expression, something you mentioned earlier. And I don't know if you want to dive into that, of just really giving yourself permission to explore and figure out what it is you like, but then not being afraid to ask for it.
Yeah, I actually also had two other thoughts, but I'll start with yours, which is one of the ways that you find out what you're interested in is by exploring yourself and, you know, giving yourself permission to relax and release. And you know what I mean? The self-care, self-love. How can you tell someone else how to pleasure you if you don't know how to pleasure you? So on that note, I'm going to give us a quick little anatomy lesson,
yes.
Which is the clitoris and the penis are homologous organs, meaning they're made from the same developmental tissue. When the bodies are developing in utero, the penis and the clitoris are made of the same parts. And that means the clitoris is the pleasure organ for women, meaning that I have never met a man who is expected to orgasm without touching his penis. But we do expect women to be able to orgasm from penetration alone, even though 80% of people with a clitoris can only orgasm from clitoral stimulation. And in 2005, we discovered that the clitoris is this rather large internal organ that actually reaches down and wraps around the vagina, which is the internal piece. The outside's called the vulva. There is science going into whether or not internal orgasms, penetrative orgasms, are actually internal stimulation of the clitoris because of the way that person's body is formed. So when we are trying to figure out what causes us pleasure, how are we pleasured, the clitoris is a really good place to start. And then there's all the other erogenous zones like the neck, nipples, buttholes, anus. I'm sorry, I'm supposed to be professional, but I prefer to say butthole to anus. Good. Anus makes me laugh harder for some reason. But there's all these other places you can stimulate in conjunction with the clitoris. But you would not expect a man to ejaculate or orgasm, or someone with a penis, I should say. You would not expect someone with a penis to orgasm from having their balls sucked alone. You would not expect them to orgasm from just kissing. So why are we expecting people with vulvas to orgasm without touching their main pleasure organ that causes orgasms? Mm-hmm. So that's one thing that I would add. So if you are looking to figure out what it is that you like, you know, there's a lot of really great resources out there that I'm happy to refer anyone to at any time.
Yeah, the scene from She's Out of Your League where he gets off just by making out with the girl, that's not real life.
Oh, actually, that's a very interesting thing that can happen, and that's
really?
kind of like a so what the part of your nervous system that I love penises so much, and I love talking about erections and ejaculation, and I told my dad I should have become a urologist because I just love penises, scientifically, of course.
Yeah.
And also not scientifically, but okay.
Time.
Yes. Okay. So there is the nervous system that controls erection and the nervous system that controls ejaculation. It's the sympathetic, parasympathetic, and I can never remember which is which without referring to my textbook. But the one that controls ejaculation is also the part of your nervous system that controls response to anxiety. So sometimes when you are erect and that other nervous system comes in, sometimes that anxiety actually reacts in an ability to get erect. They like cross each other out. Mm-hmm. And then sometimes it results in premature ejaculation because you're anxious. And so that results in the nervous system takes over for the other one. And then You know what I mean? So that's how you end up with a guy who might orgasm from anxiety too soon. So, but also, once again, that's more of like an anxiety response rather than she was stimulating my balls and it did it for me without touching the penis. Because I think she was grinding on him in that scene. I watched this literally last week. It's very fresh in my mind. Yeah.
I just read your mind bringing that movie
Clearly. Yeah. The other thing that I want to add, though, is I think we always talk about, this is just a non sequitur, but linking back to something we said earlier.
Yeah.
I've talked a lot about, I think, maybe more from a single perspective, but there's also partnered intimacy. And you and your partner might define intimacy differently. I say this because my husband and I were having a conversation where he brought up that he thinks that on a one-night stand, or in sex in general, penetration is more intimate to him than oral sex. And I said to him that, to me, penetration is nothing compared to someone going down on me. They are putting their faces in it. They are smelling it. They are tasting it. They are noticing how asymmetrical I am compared to the porn stars. They are noticing that the color is maybe different than what's been presented in porn. All of the things that are the reality of what I look like, they are now seeing, smelling, experiencing with all of their five senses. And that, to me, is a very vulnerable thing to do. To be able to put yourself in a position where this person is really seeing the part of you that you've been told is maybe inadequate or not enough, or just maybe looks different than what you've been led to believe is normal, which, by the way, all of those things that I just listed are super normal. So for me, what is considered a very intimate act is very different than what my partner might consider an intimate act. And even just being able to communicate where these differences of intimacy are, or where you're feeling more intimate or they are, I think is a very important aspect to connecting sexually with your partner.
Yeah, and that just leads to communication in general, right? So it sounds like not only just understanding physically how you're aroused and just sexually what you enjoy, what you like, where your boundaries are, but even psychologically where you're at and how you feel about different situations, or what things can get you going.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Or even just what you're defining as sexy or sexual, right? Yeah. And that, once again, goes back to knowing yourself before someone else can know you.
Yeah, exactly. Like, there's been times where I love just laying on the couch and just having my boyfriend run his finger across my back, nice light touch, but it'll put me to sleep, not turn me on. Other people, that could turn you on. And so it's just, everyone's so different.
Yeah. And that's kind of the fun of it, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Like, getting to learn what this other person wants. And then I think also when you've been in a relationship for very long, you kind of forget sometimes that there were other things that you used to like just because your partner doesn't like doing them as much. You know, try and remember the things that you like separate from your partner, the things that you liked when you were with other people. It's kind of why exploring with different partners is a really important and useful part of growth and development. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I know we're talking to adults, but when people are morally panicked about teenagers exploring, I can't understand that, because isn't that the whole point of being a young person, is to grow and explore and develop and learn what works for you and what doesn't work for you, and become healthy adults who can have healthy conversations around it.
It also might be a little bit of the difference of, actually, I don't know how different it is in Canada versus the United States, but there also might be a little bit of difference in culture there too, possibly.
Right. I mean, yes and no. We don't have government-mandated abstinence-only education. People can choose to teach abstinence-only education, but our government actually released a document saying that every single person has the right to comprehensive sex ed. Comprehensive meaning it doesn't just talk about how babies are or aren't made, but also how pleasure is an important part of your sexual education. Mm-hmm. Because most of us aren't having sex to make babies most of the time. Most of us are having sex because it feels good. So if that's a fact, why are we pretending otherwise? To be a healthy adult having a healthy sex life, we need to acknowledge that pleasure is the main focus. And we need to teach how to do that. And pleasure isn't just physical pleasure. We don't go to how to give blowjob classes in high school here. That's absolutely not a thing. But it is about healthy relationships and healthy relationship communication and all of those other aspects that will lead to a pleasurable sex life.
Yeah. And also, if you don't talk about it, it just makes kids want to understand and explore it more. So there's also that aspect as well.
And one thing that you'll hear repeated a lot in that document is sexual health is health. Sexual health is part of your overall health. And frequently, if there's some sort of sexual health issue, it's usually because it's a symptom of something else that's wrong in the body, whether it's depression or changing your hormones.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's a good thing to note too, because so often, I mean, even when we thought about creating this podcast, health is so often kept in this little box of you go to your OBGYN or your family practitioner every single year for an annual checkup, and if nothing's wrong with you, then you're healthy. But there are all these different aspects of health that are so important to consider and understand. And I mean, you can probably explain the science better of being sexually active, how it releases certain hormones, can help reduce stress, can help, I mean, just so many different things in the body, whether it's with the partner or with yourself. It's good for you, and understanding it and the psychological aspects of it, the emotional aspects of it. It relates to so many aspects in your relationship with yourself and your partners, whoever they may be.
Well, I think it's diluted to say that our world is not all about sex. It's everywhere you go. It's on billboards. It's all anyone is ever thinking about. People who claim to not think about sex ever, it's literally, you can't escape it. It's in the media. As mentioned, it's on billboards. It's in our advertising. It's in workplace policies. It's everywhere. And asexual people are the first ones to tell you that our entire world is obsessed with sex. So, it is very much an interesting dynamic where we have to pretend like it's not a thing that we're constantly thinking about because it's quote unquote inappropriate, when sexual health is really important and a really important part of overall health. You mentioned like going to your OBGYN, but just because you don't have cervical cancer doesn't mean you can't optimize your sexual health in other ways. I know quite a few people who are big fans of balanced diets and, taking hormone balancing supplements, seeing a naturopath for other things. A lot of people who get their periods do think that really bad PMS or really bad cramps are something they have to live with. But frequently that's a sign of a hormone imbalance, and your doctor's not necessarily going to prescribe anything other than the birth control pill for you, which is why, honestly, a trustworthy naturopath can come into handy right there. Because naturopaths typically look beyond what the pharmaceutical company can do for you. They're not engineers, they're trained differently, but they're still medical practitioners. Not all naturopaths are trustworthy, but not all doctors are trustworthy either. I've gotten bad advice from doctors too. So I'm just a really big fan of, if someone is struggling with their physical body and how it is impacting their sex life, seeking out information other than just what your GP might tell you.
I love that you mentioned that, because I actually interviewed a naturopathic doctor last week about hormones and hormone imbalances, and she talked about all of those same things. But I love that you related it to sexual health, because even if you feel your libido has dropped, it could be related to stress or something else which affects your hormones. And like, there are things that you can seek help for, and it is okay to seek help for if something feels off or wrong in all aspects of health, but including your sexual health.
If someone ignores you when you say this is a problem, how are they supposed to know your body better than you? Mm-hmm. And it's okay to look for different answers as long as we are trusting those answers. I'm not an advocate for rejecting science in terms of I don't think that supplements are going to cure cancer. That's not at all what I am saying. But I am saying there are definitely ways to optimize your health. And the only person who's going to know if it's optimal is you, because you're the one living in your body and you're the one feeling it.
Yeah. So what is one or two main things that you would want people to take away from this conversation? Either anything that we haven't talked about yet, or if you really want to hit home a couple points.
Well, I have my two pieces of advice. One of them we didn't even get to at all, but I'm actually very passionate about talking about STIs and how stigma against STIs keeps us from living our full lives. So one thing I would say is, if you're a sexually active adult, which most of us are, and a lot of us are not exactly monogamous by the time we hit 30 because we're still dating, I think understanding that STIs are a part of life. It's like how taking the subway can result in a cold. Sometimes you do everything you can and you still get an STI, and that's okay, because that's just a fact of life. It's a germ trying to find a host body. So if you are someone who's contracted an STI, I want you to know you're still a valid human being. You are not dirty. You are still going to have a sex life, and everything is going to be okay. So that is the one thing I would like to say. And then I guess the last message I'm going to add is, once again, sexual health is part of health. We don't need to feel ashamed of things just because they're related to our genitals. They're just a part of our body. I want to make people feel empowered to be confident in themselves and confident in their sexuality and not be ashamed of their body and what it can do for them. That's pretty much all.
I love that. And I love, and even if you do want to talk about the STIs a little bit because you are so passionate about it, that's such a good point that you brought up, because I remember being a young girl in middle school when we really started learning about these, thinking, if I get one of these, I'm going to have it forever. And then I'm going to give birth and give it to my baby. And it was this fear put in me, which seems so silly now to say out loud. It sounds like the Mean Girls quote of, if you have sex, you will get an STI and die. Or was it,
Yeah.
you'll get pregnant and die, whatever the quote is. Sorry, I misquoted.
Yeah.
Mean Girls. Shame on me. But that's literally the fear that I had in my head about STIs.
Well, there are some STIs that are not treatable that do live in your body forever, and there are many that are. And a lot of the ones that are not treatable that live in your body forever don't actually impact your life in any great way, shape, or form. And we also have vaccines for a lot of them, like hepatitis B, which is one that is a sexually transmitted infection. Most of us get vaccinated against that as babies, specifically because the best way to prevent it is through a vaccine. Same with HPV in Canada, and it's a vaccine that everyone is pretty much getting in school now. And in Australia, where they've had widespread use of it, cervical cancer has been all but eradicated. So, vaccines are one way that we are working on preventing those untreatable STIs. But another one is herpes. Most people living with herpes will tell you that on the day-to-day, it doesn't impact their life, aside from the stigma people have against people with herpes. The number one impact is stigma, not on the actual effect it has on your bodies. And HIV in North America, with good health care and health treatment, doesn't really turn into AIDS anymore. And there's really great ways of preventing its transmission with antiretrovirals. And it's not the AIDS crisis of the 80s anymore. We have a lot more scientific information. It's for many people, an STI I know you still say STD in the States, but it is a sexually transmitted infection that people live with that does not ruin their lives and does not ruin their sex lives because of the advances in technology that we've had. And when it comes to things like chlamydia, gonorrhea, syphilis, all of those are curable and treatable. And I should add, most people are asymptomatic. So if you are a sexually active adult, the best way of making sure that you're taking care of your health is by getting tested regularly. And what regularly means is between you and your doctor, not anyone else. It's not every 2 weeks or once a year. I can't give anyone a recommendation because you, once again, will know your body and what you are comfortable with the most. And your doctor will help determine what frequency is right for you. So, you don't get an STI and die. You don't get an STI and have a ruined sex life. If anything, if you have an STI and someone treats you like trash, then you know that wasn't someone worth having sex with in the first place, because they're probably someone not getting tested regularly themselves out of fear. Which, by the way, STI stigma does result in people not getting tested because they're afraid they'll have one, and then they have to tell people. So you have all these people who are asymptomatic walking around passing STIs because they're so afraid of being judged for having an STI. Stigma's the mean evil here, not the STI.
And it sounds like that's kind of the theme through everything you talked through, is just stigma of people creating these stories, getting in their head, whether it's the way we're taught or whether it's religious or cultural or just things we're told in school. There's just so many things that we're taught to have stigma around. But really, it sounds like overall, just be who you want to be. Don't worry about it. Just explore what you want, communicate what you want. Everything's okay as long as you do it safely and you respect other people that you're involved with.
Exactly. I would say that I'm going to bring it back, comes back to communication, respect, communicating respectfully, communicating in a great way. And if you are with someone who, you meet someone and they have an STI and you choose not to engage in a sexual contact with them for whatever reason, that's fine too. But you can communicate that in a really respectful, non-stigmatizing way. And that's acceptable as well.
Yeah. Amazing. Rae, if anyone has any more questions or wants to follow you, or even, are you allowed to work with people in the States virtually? I don't know how that works.
I can work with anyone. Yeah, that's what PayPal's for.
Awesome. So if anyone wants to work with you, talk with you, follow you, get more information, advice from you, what's the best way for them to get a hold of you or follow you?
Yeah, I have a website, sharewithrae.com, SHAREWITHRAE.com. My social media handle is @WifeBayRae on Instagram and also TikTok, but TikTok doesn't let me post very often anymore without taking my stuff down. So Wife Bay Rae is WIFEBAERAE. And then the last thing I would say is, if you want to listen to my podcast, it's called Sex News with Rae, and we pretty much just talk about sex very casually and the news. Sex in the News. So that's @Sex News with Rae on Instagram or Sex News with Rae on any podcasting app.
I love it. And I'll make sure to link all of those in the show notes.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you.